This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 506, Automated Testing Kit. On today's show, we're talking about the Automated Testing Kit demo recipe, why automated testing is important, and how this recipe helps with our guest, André Angelantoni. We'll also cover Taxonomy Views Integrator as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is André Angelantoni. André is the founder of Performant Labs, a longtime Drupal consultancy and now testing agency. He's been working with Drupal since 2007 and with web projects since the very beginning of the web. He speaks at Drupal camps and conferences, regularly sharing his knowledge, and is the designer and one of the maintainers of Automated Testing Kit. André, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
At Enlightened Development, and today joining us for the third week, Nora Medlin, Director of Delivery and Program Operations at Bluefly.io. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And as usual, John Picozzi, Solution Architect at EPAM.
Howdy.
Right. And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to customize the taxonomy display view for a specific vocabulary or even a specific taxonomy term? There's a module for that. It's called Taxonomy Views Integrator, and it was created in September of 2009 by Derek Webb, though the most recent release was made by Kevin Quillen, who was a guest on the podcast in episodes 406 and 500. It has a 2.0.0 version available, which works with Drupal 8, 9, 10, and 11. It is actively maintained and has both security and test coverage, as well as documentation. And it has 13 open issues, 4 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is quite good considering the module is officially in use by over 24,000 sites. Now, after enabling this module, when you edit a vocabulary or a taxonomy term, users with the necessary permissions will see an option to specify a view to show tagged content. And you can also choose which display to use. You can create a new view from scratch or clone the taxonomy term view created by core, or use a view defined in code. Obviously, it's critical for the view to have a contextual filter for the taxonomy term itself. Using this module could allow you to customize the presentation on the view page, for example, to make the exposed filters more relevant, or even to split out the content. For example, if you wanted to list only news in the main view display and have events and blog posts listed separately as in like attachment views. I found this module really helpful during some recent work on the Drupal event platform, so I thought I would share it with our listeners. So let's talk about Taxonomy Views Integrator.
Sorry, I still don't quite get what it's doing.
So okay, let me put it another way. So within views within Drupal, you can enable there's that taxonomy term view, and then you can customize that. But then the changes that you make apply across all taxonomy terms on your site. So this allows you to make changes, but make them selective to either a specific vocabulary or even a specific individual taxonomy term.
Okay, so you can keep the normal default Drupal /taxonomy/term/ whatever, but then each individual, is it per vocabulary or is it per term? You can customize it.
You can do either or both.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not going to lie. I'm still a little bit confused, but you guys just keep going.
Well, okay. So maybe it would help for me to explain a little bit about why I wanted to use it for the event platform. So I ended up in a recent set of changes, basically implementing a multi-event architecture. So events exist within a site using the event platform as taxonomy terms. And then you have association. You basically tag all of the like sessions and BOFs and all of the different things, sponsors, all of that gets tagged as being related to an individual event. Now, what that would mean is when you go to the event page, like go to actually view the listing for the event, it would list all of that stuff in the default view. And I could alter the that one single view that applies to all taxonomy terms to basically not have it do all of that. But then that basically breaks the standard taxonomy view for all of the vocabularies across the site, even though I really only needed to make changes for how events display. So using Taxonomy Views Integrator allowed me to make changes that were specifically for how events display on there. And then if I wanted to, even on an individual event, I could say, maybe only have it show the most recent sessions during the call for sessions while it's open, and then switch to highlighted sessions later on in the process, or make those kinds of things, but
Yeah.
even for an individual event as well. So that's hopefully gives you a little more like an actual use case of where this module could be useful.
I think it's interesting, but it's funny because normally I just take a different approach. I just completely disable the default taxonomy view and write my own, and then use like rabbit hole or custom code to make sure that they link to whatever view that I want to. But it sounds like this is a nice way to just create the view, assign it, and then you don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot in this case we're displaying the taxonomy directly and they're getting sent somewhere that they're not meant to be sent. So I can see this use case. It's a way to just basically hijack that that route essentially. So
Yeah.
I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
But the name just threw me off a little bit. Why the word integrator at the end? I kept on expecting something different. It sounds more like a prettifier, or I don't know, something.
Or taxonomy view overrides, or I don't know.
Override would even be
Yeah.
better.
Because
Yeah, I don't
naming
accept
modules is
integrator.
hard. I mean, that's probably what it
Yeah,
boils down to.
Can verify.
yeah, maybe.
Absolutely. All right. And does it work with, I imagine you didn't test this, but it's something that's always on my mind. Does it work with like translation? So if you have a taxonomy that has multiple languages, can you define different endpoints or
That's a great question. I don't recall having seen anything that would indicate you could set different views for different languages, but I would imagine you could probably use translations for the view itself that it points to.
okay. Yeah, that works. And the only reason why I think it would be, I mean, people can do all sorts of crazy things, but I was thinking particularly with the view, you might, I mean, I guess if you translate like the date formats already, then you're going to get that stuff output correctly anyway. But so maybe it's really not a non-issue, but I can see sometimes you need to override that stuff. Very cool. I'll have to keep this. I think this is going to be a hard one to keep in mind, maybe because of the name, but it does seem like it lets you kind of lean into how Drupal does things around taxonomy rather than kind of ripping out the whole system, which is always good. But
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there was a period in the Drupal community where everything was sort of three-letter acronyms, which kind of makes me think that maybe when the machine name for this, which is TVI, was created, was harkens back to those days, and it feels like we've since kind of moved back away from that. So
yeah, I mean, this was, you said 2009. So yeah, this definitely was in the height of Drupal. Well, it was right before Drupal 7. This was Drupal 6. Yeah, everything was, you-
yeah,
everything was,
ECK and all
yeah,
those good things. So yeah.
CCK. Yeah. Yeah, they all three-letter acronyms. Well, Martin, that this was one of the rare modules of the week where it was it's a tough use case. It took both John and I a couple of explanations, but I think it's a good one for people to be aware of. I'm gonna have to look at it because, like I said, it's kind of like the last piece of taxonomy that I still struggle with, and it always it feels like I'm fighting against Drupal when I'm writing those custom views because you, like I said, you always have to make sure every time you're printing it, you're overwriting that route or something. So this might be a really clean way of modifying that. So yeah, I'll have to check it out. All right. So if folks wanted to get in touch with you and suggest another module of the week, what's the best way for them to do that?
We are always happy to talk about interesting modules in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social platforms.
Awesome. See you next week.
See you then.
And now we can move on to our primary topic. Let's start with a kind of high level question. Can you tell us what the automated testing kit is?
Sure. So it's a suite of standard tests, almost 24 of them now, for a vanilla Drupal site that can be customized. And so there are tests for media entities and nodes, and there are tests for logging in and password resets and all that sort of good stuff. And typically, since they're shipped for just vanilla Drupal, and people generally don't run vanilla Drupal sites, so there is a little bit of customization that has to go on, but like the bulk of the work is done for people. And then as we were making all these tests, we made lots of helper functions. We have about 16, maybe 18 helper functions. We had to figure out things like how to communicate between the test runner and the target server so that we could ask the target server questions and do things like run pre-flight tests to make sure that the target server is ready to be tested, that sort of thing. And it's written in both, it's in the language is always JavaScript, but it ships with two frameworks. There are identical tests, one set in Cypress and one set in Playwright.
Oh, really?
Can we dive a little bit deeper into the kinds of tests, right? So and maybe we start from the top and kind of work more granularly, right? So are these just Drupal tests like for Drupal core, or are there tests for other pieces of functionality that you might encounter?
They are, at this point, they are more for Drupal core, although we're starting to branch out. So the next suite of tests that we're going to add is for FedRAMP compliance. So, but the core ones are things like, is your caching working? And that's going to actually test your header. Like I said, is your article page working? Is your CK editor working? And of course, you can add embellishments to all the basic tests, but the basics are there for you. And it's so funny because maybe it's in all frameworks, I'm not sure, but in Drupal, definitely end-to-end testing often takes over things like integration testing and even does a little bit of unit testing, that sort of thing. So we don't try to get too detailed in that sort of area, and we try to stick to what end-to-end is really designed for, which is following a user journey.
I
So
think you said two interesting things there that I just want to follow up on. One, the suite of tests for FedRAMP compliance, is that going to be built as a submodule, or is that just going to be something that you run the test suite and it just does those tests for you?
No, it'll be a part of the test suite. So all the tests are numbered, and each group of tests, like for instance, all the node tests, whether it's a taxonomy test or it's a typical node test or a media, they're all within a certain number set, let's say 1000 to 1099, for example. And so the FedRAMP ones will be in their own numeric set. Everything is tagged, though, so they'll be tagged as FedRAMP. And if during the setup process, all the tests are installed into your site using the setup script, but you can then just delete whatever you don't want if you're not using it.
And then the other thing that you said was something that I never actually thought about testing, I guess, was like, is your caching working? Like, I think that's like a great test to be able to say like, hey, I've edited my cache tags or made some change to the caching. Like, did I break something? And that's I think a great use case for testing, or one great use case, I should say.
Yeah, and they're, as people are starting to use the kit and submit back tests, we're going to have some that are for more specialized usage. Like, for instance, Stanford contributed back a test for feeds. Now, does everyone use feeds? No, but it's super common. So for the people who need it, there's going to be a test already for them. So the vision is keep on accepting new tests as some of the more popular modules have people write tests for them. So people can contribute back in one language, and then we'll translate it into another one. We convert it, like they can submit it in Cypress because that's what their team uses, but then we'll convert it to Playwright, and then when it goes into the kit, both versions are added at the same time.
okay, so I have a couple of questions. My first one is, so this is meant to be only purely end-to-end testing for a given project, right? Is
Yes.
that the goal of this? Okay, because when you first started talking about like login testing, it's like, well, Drupal core has a suite of tests that covers that, but also different modules can interact with it and can certainly break that workflow. So if it wasn't integrate, it wasn't end to end. I don't know why you wouldn't just use kind of the core test suite for that. But if it's end to end, is meant to be implemented on a specific project, that makes perfect sense to me. That's actually pretty exciting to be honest.
Well, you're right. It's true that the core modules do just the core things, but the design of the test is that people are going to, or the library rather, is that they're going to customize it because they do make changes
Yeah,
and they do have theme changes, and
which can
sometimes it's
break.
which can break things, and then they have SSO, which is a whole different uh, a can of beans, so to speak. So the vision is, what if we could, every time we launch a new Drupal site, out of the box, have at least 2 dozen tests that we've lightly customized, and bang, right away, those are the smoke tests. We right away know if our implementation of Drupal is running, and we have those tests that can give us results within 10 minutes.
Very exciting. And I don't know. So the other thing that piqued my interest is you mentioned that you're using both Cypress and Playwright. And I'm chuckling because the community at large has been talking about which one they prefer, right? And some people, like you said, some teams use Playwright, some teams use Cypress. But I don't know if you know this, but Core uses Nightwatch,
I
which
do. I'm
has been.
participating on that famous issue right
Oh,
now.
okay. That's what I was
Oh
gonna ask
yeah.
you about. So there's an issue to migrate Drupal away from Nightwatch because Nightwatch has not really seen an update in what, like 10 years. Nobody knows how to get it running locally. It kind of just magically works and fails all the time on GitLab. Are you interested in, and I'm not volunteering you for this work, but are you interested in, or is there a way to kind of leverage the automated testing kit in converting away from Nightwatch to either Playwright or Cypress? Because I think that would be a huge benefit for core.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that. So I let me just back up by just saying that, so my 2 cents in that thread, I make the case to move to Playwright. If you're going to choose between just Cypress and Playwright, I say Playwright. Cypress really tilled new ground when they came out, and unfortunately though, they made some design decisions that are coming back to bite them, I think. And Playwright doesn't have those same things. So some of the design decisions, without going into too much depth, is that the actual code that is your test runs inside of the browser, which means that it's actually really, really slow. You could say that the advantage is that now the script has absolute access to your entire application, which really matters in a headless sort of thing, because you're going to, but at the same time, the cost is that it's really, so one team moved from Cypress to Playwright, and their testing increased by 74% their speed, which
Oh
is not
wow.
nothing. When you have a 3-hour test already, and you can chop that down by 3/4, that's quite nice, and it really affects the team's ability to get work done efficiently. So that's one design decision that they made. And then because it's trapped inside of the browser, they have trouble things like opening new tabs and controlling the browser like you can do when you're coming from the outside and just simply sending commands in. So Playwright was forked off of Puppeteer, and then
Uh,
Microsoft added all that new capabilities that they've added. And so the net result is you can do pretty much everything you can in Cypress, but it's faster. And then they did one third design change that at first I really, really liked. And then when I started to see new people struggle with debugging and how to work with Cypress, I decided that it was actually not a good idea. They do chaining of their commands in such a way that, and I'm not sure if it's necessary that they did the second piece, but what they did with the chaining is they also queued up the commands to run at a later time. So there's this process of looking at the script, and then it queues up everything that it's going to do to the browser. Well, that automatically damages your ability to debug in real time, because now you've got these two processes and you don't know whether you're going to be debugging during the, everyone thinks that they're debugging when it runs through the code the first time, but that's not true. They actually have to wait for the commands which are queued up to debug. So this is a very kind of unique style that they've done, and it trips new developers, testers up all the time, and I've spent
Hmm.
a lot of time teaching people how to get around things that we have Drupalisms. Well, these are Cypressisms.
Hmm.
And these Cypressisms are just completely unnecessary. I can understand why they tried it. I think we can say they tried it and it didn't work. So Playwright is the better, more typical tool.
Hmm. Very cool.
So just to dig into that a little bit here, and maybe just I'm still grasping exactly what automated testing kit is. It feels like it's a wrapper or enabler or something to that effect. I mean, how would you say that it provides value beyond Cypress and Playwright and/or augments Cypress and Playwright tests?
Well, when you get Cypress and Playwright, all you've got is a framework like Drupal. It doesn't actually do anything.
Mhm.
So you still have to write your tests. What automated testing kit is a series of tests that are ready to run right away, and they'll run right away on the vanilla site. So we have a recipe that's available on the project page. And the project page, I think you guys probably have a link to it in the show notes or something. So
Yep.
if you go and you run the recipe, and there's also going to be a link by the time this airs, we're going to have a link on Drupal Forge so people can watch it run as well. But you now have almost 24 tests that you didn't have to write. It's actually quite a bit of work to learn these new tools and to get people up to speed. And then while you're writing your tests, pretty quickly you're going to start to write helper functions. Well, we've got helper functions like delete this node and create this node and create this user and that sort of thing. And then because we have a communication channel, which is not common in the testing world, between the test runner and Drupal itself, we can do all sorts of cool things that is hard to do in other ways. So for instance, I had mentioned earlier the pre-flight checks. So what are some of the things that we do in the pre-flight checks? Well, they're called pre-flight checks, but it's really two things. We can send commands to the remote Drupal, so we can disable a module. Like let's say before you start, you want your SMTP module turned off because you don't want to mistakenly email everyone on the client's user list, right? Which that's never happened before. And maybe enable other modules, or maybe another thing you can do is you can send configuration commands. So typically before you start a testing suite, certain things have to be configured. Well, one of the things you might do is you might switch from the production server to one of your test servers so that you're not hammering the production server during your test. But all that sort of configuration typically comes from the clone that you've done of the production environment. And if you don't change that when you start running your tests, you're going to actually inadvertently be still, at least in some parts, targeting your production environment. So all the things that bugged me over the years of making testing difficult, I'm trying to solve those. And one part that I didn't mention at the beginning is that we also released Testor, which is a snapshot management tool and sanitization tool. So everyone usually writes scripts that goes and pulls the latest dump and then puts it somewhere. Well,
Yeah.
we've got Testor that runs either inside of Drupal or outside of Drupal that does all that for you. And then you can split the snapshots. It handles both files and database snapshots. And then you can categorize them. So the testers have their own snapshot and then the developers have their own. And that's common because the testers often need to make changes to their snapshots. They have to add
Yeah.
data that they need to configure it specifically for. And
Yeah.
so that can be stored in either an SFTP server or an S3 server. So either one of those works. And then we have sanitization because it's all built on Robo. So you can make a little plugin and it will, and DDEV. So you can launch MySQL, import the snapshot, execute a whole bunch of sanitization on it, not just the basic Drupal stuff that's included, but you can make your own plugins and run your own SQL commands. And then the result of that Testor will then push to your remote snapshot database or server.
Okay. And well, that actually kind of leads into my next question, which is there's kind of two parts to testing, especially automated testing that are complex. The first part is like the prep and the writing the tests, which we've talked a little bit about. But the other side is actually running the tests. Like, where do you do that? So you could do that in GitHub Actions, you can do that in GitLab, you can do that in Travis CI if that still exists. Where are you, from the kit's perspective, where are you expecting people to run these tests? Are you expecting them to run it locally in their DDEV? Are you expecting them to run it in some CI process, some AWS server? Like, where are these tests meant to be run?
Well, all of the above. The test runner can be anywhere, and typically
Oh,
a team
okay.
starts by having the test runner run locally. So with Playwright, you install Playwright and then a whole bunch of browsers, or Cypress. It's a very similar sort of thing. And then there are configuration files for both frameworks. And in the configuration file, you give it the target URL. And so if you're running DDEV, that'll be just the local snapshot that you're running of your website. And then if you want to target someplace else, like let's say your server, you're hosting your website on Pantheon, then you give it the Pantheon URL, and then there's another configuration file inside of Automated Testing Kit. You tell Automated Testing Kit, I'm now actually targeting a Pantheon site. So when you send drush commands, I need you to send them through Terminus. And then everything now communicates with Pantheon remotely. All the pre-flight checks happen with Pantheon. All the remote commands like setting up nodes or deleting nodes. There's often cleanup and that has to be done after each test, that sort of thing. So you can point it anywhere. Now that's if you're running the test runner on your local machine. There's nothing stopping you from running this all on GitHub. So we just implemented this for UCOP, the UC Office of the President, and they're all running it on GitHub. And what's really cool, what you can do with the GitHub action scripts, they're called workflows, is you can actually modify the dialog box that appears on GitHub and add more arguments to it. So we give them a drop down that says, okay, what's the target? Well, is it dev? Is it test? Is it live? Okay, great. Are there any tags you want to include or exclude? So we always exclude any tests that have the skip tag. How many shards do you want to run? How many threads do you want to run? All that stuff can be denoted inside of the UI of GitHub and then run against any destination. And then we've also implemented Tugboat for them so that every time they make a PR, all the tests run, and Tugboat is messaged to start a feature preview branch or environment rather. And so the tests are run just against that environment, which is running just that feature branch.
So more philosophically, then, if you were to like make the use case, why would I want to use this kind of testing kit? I've heard you say, that it was to solve problems that you encountered and the things that you wanted to solve. But holistically, could you speak to like just why would a development team want to adopt something like this?
Sure.
More than just a kit or a list or a collection of suites.
Yeah, so it's going to save them time because they're not writing these tests. That's one thing. And they haven't had to figure out all the things that we have, like communicating over SSH and through Terminus and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of thinking in the design of the kit they don't have to do. They can just say, oh, how did they do that? Oh, yeah, that's how I would do it too, probably. So that's one thing. It's going to save them a lot of time. Then the value is that it's also going to teach their developers how to write tests because they can use any of the tests as examples, teach them how to write helper functions, gives them an opportunity to contribute back to the Drupal community if they write a good test and we like it. Then it goes in. I can't imagine not. Yeah, there might be some real esoteric tests that we might say no to, but if it's a pretty popular module and someone wrote a test for it, we want it in the kit. So I would say basically it's saving time and education. It's educating people, gives them a way to quickly learn how to start writing tests.
Question on the Terminus integration, right? So are there other hosting vendor integrations that you have, or is it strictly kind of like Pantheon focused?
There is, well, right now you can use the typical alias system that Drupal provides, which is just SSH. So anything, you can always have that as a fallback. And then we have Terminus, and we're talking to Amazy. They have a tool as well. And then Drupal Forge, Salim wants to make his own tool because he doesn't want to open up SSH on the instances there, which I get. So we'll alter the test so that instead of saying is Pantheon the target, it'll be is Drupal Forge the target or is Amazy the target, and then it will use the proper mechanism depending on what it is. But
Got it.
at this point in the game, it's real easy to actually change between tools because you just change the syntax of the command you send. Instead of the terminus syntax, you can send it to anything you want. So if people have their own tool right now, they can quickly go in there and adjust it for their purposes.
So this is actually a question for Nick because I don't know, and he's a platform SH user lover. Does platform have like a command line tool similar to Terminus?
They do, but it's a little bit different. You would still use Drush kind of normally. The platform tool is more about. I think you would use it more for like what you've mentioned R is used for. So like I use the platform tool very often to pull down the most recent database or download files. You can also use it to like set up a new integration and new project or stuff. But really, the two most common things I'm doing are like grabbing the most recent database dump and grabbing the most recent set of files. So it sounds like more like you would want to integrate Aura with that because it just makes it, you'd want to pull that stuff in, sanitize it, and then send that to whatever server you're using to store those dumps.
Got it. I was just
But
curious because I didn't actually know if platform had that kind of thing. I
they
assumed
do,
they did. I assume they did, but
yeah. But
yeah,
but if you're using it,
now you can build an integration into like the tests, the automated testing kit for platform. Look at that.
Well, and it's real quick. If you made an issue and you just pointed us to the documentation, I bet you we could whip it out real quick.
yeah,
But
I'm
it would
sure
be
that-
great if you wanted to use the kit. Then we'd have a real tester rather than me just inventing something that I don't know if it's going to get used.
Yeah, I have a client in mind that I'm going to chat with about this because we literally were talking about adding some testing to a particular project. I think last week. So this might be a good a good way to test the testing.
Well, if you have to, first of all, you may all want to learn a little bit about the kit itself. So if you go to the Drupal project page, there is a 42-minute introduction video that will walk you through all the pieces. There's a recipe. There are written instructions for the recipe. There's also a video that walks you through the running of the recipe. I have done a bunch of presentations at WebCamp, Stanford WebCamp, on it as well. And there's even in Bad Camp last year, I did a comparison, why choose Cypress versus Playwright. So I go through those two as a choice. And if you go into the documentation, which is also linked on the project page, and you go to the learning resources section, I've collected every video that I could find on Cypress compared to Playwright, and then Drupal testing, which has work from Sean, all over that. So it's a really great, that learning resources page. You will learn a lot if you just watch those videos and read those blog posts. Plus, I have a blog entry by that team that converted from Cypress to Playwright. So you can see, and a video, so you can see why they made the decision. And actually, with the help of AI, it was really quick to change from Cypress to Playwright. They were done in like 2 weeks. It was crazy.
Oh, well. So can you talk? We've talked about the recipe a couple times now, or mentioned the recipe a couple times now. Can you dig in a little bit to what the recipe provides on top of the testing kit?
Yeah. So the recipe. Oh, I love recipe so much. God, I wish we'd had this 10 years ago. So the recipe, as you know, recipes can install either other recipes or they can install modules, and then they make configuration changes that they need. So what we've done is we pull in we create a basic, inside of DDEV, we create a basic Drupal site. Excuse me. And then the recipe pulls in automated testing kit. And that process also pulls in all of the modules that we use at the same time that are optional, but in the recipe, we just install all of them. So one of the modules is QA accounts, for instance. So typically best practice is that you have a series of QA accounts that are used for your testing And that way, all the data that's produced by your testing process is owned by those accounts. So that gets installed, for instance. The XML sitemap gets installed because we have a test that uses XML sitemap. And then what it also does is it runs a cron job, so at the very end. And what that does is it indexes the server. So some of our installations, we have Solar running inside of Drupal. And so in this one here, it'll index whatever dummy data we've added there so that we can run our search tests, whether it's Solar or built in Drupal. And so it's pretty nuts, soup to nuts kind of system. The Drupal Forge link, which is going to be the icon is on the front page towards the bottom left. And so that's going to be up by the end of this week, by the time the podcast comes out. And you go click on that and it will run the recipe and it will show you it'll show you actually running them. So you'll see Playwright's console output inside of Drupal. And then at the end, a dialog will come up that says, show me the report. And that will be the actual Playwright report. And that'll come up, and then you can do filtering on the report and see what the results were on your local test.
Very cool.
So I read somewhere when kind of looking over the recipe and doing a little bit of research to come up our questions for today, that you don't recommend using it on an existing. Can you go into maybe why that is and if that has kind of changed over the course of the last couple of months or so?
No, we would have to make a second recipe that isn't as opinionated as our recipe is. See, our recipe is a demo recipe. It's meant to run a demo. And that means that we clobber configuration and we don't care. So if we were to release that recipe and suggest to people that they use it to install automated testing kit on their site, then things are going to change and they're not going to know why. Yes, we show it when everything runs, but people, can't read that fast. So I think we put a lot of effort into the documentation. So we have good documentation for how to install it, and it's still pretty simple. You use Composer to add the module, then you run a setup script. You say, do you want Cypress or do you want Playwright? And then it copies all the files from outside. It has to copy the tests from outside of the module into a root directory. That makes it easier for everything. And then it'll also install the configuration files. And it only starts to get a little bit complicated once you want to start setting up things like test email servers. But the basics are pretty fast. You install the module, you run the test setup script, and you're done. Well, I should say you install Cypress and Playwright too, but all the instructions are there. So could we make a recipe that does that for someone? Yes, we could. And I think what it would need to happen is, and I think this is coming out in 11.3, is the ability to ask questions inside of recipes. So the question would be, do you want to install this module and this set of tests? Do you want to, so if I had a series of, let's say, 8 or 10 questions, do you want to test XML sitemap? Well, no, I don't use XML sitemap, so say no. Okay, well, now I don't have to install that module, and I don't have to install those tests. So until recipes itself gets the extra capabilities like that, it doesn't make sense to use recipes to install this, because it'll clobber everything and install a whole bunch of crap that maybe you don't need. No, it's better just to be solid and start from scratch.
And all these tests and things are meant to be dev dependencies anyway, right? Like you're not meant to have any of this installed on production anyway, right? That feels.
Well, the tests themselves, okay, there's two questions there. So, or two parts to look at rather. So the tests themselves, they go into a folder on your root directory. Cypress goes in the Cypress directory, and then Playwright has its tests directory. And I have found it, because I've implemented this in a bunch of places now, I have found it best to keep your tests in the same repo. Some teams like having their tests in a totally different repo, but I find that makes it adds too much friction to the whole process. I think keep them all together. So that's one part. So the tests have to get copied outside of the contrib space where the module is installed, where the automated testing kit module is, and they have to move up into that root directory. That's number one. But you do run automated testing kit on the source code, or you do install it. Whether you enable it on production is up to you. That depends on whether you're going to run tests against production or not, which is something that we only recommend to teams once they're really, really good at testing, because it's super easy to mess up testing on production. And you have to do a lot of preparation, like you have to make sure that the test data isn't visible to the end user. So it takes actually quite a bit of work to make sure your tests don't mess up production. So we suggest that people start by just testing locally and then testing on the dev environment or their test environment remotely. And that will need automated testing kit on the other side for a couple of reasons. One, because we communicate with it and we have some custom drush commands that we use that have to be installed. And then second, the kit also includes hooks that make certain selectors much easier to find. So we add a hook that modifies the output of the nodes, taxonomies, and media entities so that there's an ID or a class, because sometimes it's actually real hard to, like taxonomies in particular, we're hard to target. You're like, why isn't Drupal just giving me something easy to latch onto? So these hooks now make it super easy to find all the selectors you want. And that obviously means that the hooks have to run on the destination, on the target server.
Makes sense.
So
And see, that's the value of having both sides, control over both sides. You can do all these fun things. You have all this capability on the far side, on the target server, but the test runner can talk to it and do things. We're doing things that I wish we could have done a long time ago. So I think we're really pushing the edge here.
Awesome.
Going back just a slight bit, thinking of recipes, and now that recipes are on everybody's minds these days, what would you say was your experience in building your own recipe for this demo recipe for the automated testing kit?
It was not a problem because I wasn't pressing to do too many things before recipes were ready to do it. I started writing the recipe about 1.5 years ago. So I was using early versions of the recipe code. And so one of the things that made me pause for a little bit is instead of having a submodule, an automated testing kit that would run default content module so that I could import my dummy data, I'm like, okay, this has got to be an easier way to do that. So we had a conversation inside of recipes, and I don't know who suggested it, but somebody said, why don't we just import the code? Why don't we just use the code from default content in recipes? And so now recipes can import default content like default nodes. Now, all of a sudden, if I want to import a 404 or a 403 page, because that's what my demo recipe wants to test against, I can do that without twisting myself into a pretzel. So I was patient and I waited the 1.5 years or so for all these features to come in, and I thought it was a smooth thing, but I tried a couple things, and when it didn't work, I just waited, made some suggestions. I think I put in the first proposal for how to ask questions, and people then built on that. So now we're going to have prompts in recipes so that we can ask things like, what's your password, and do you want to install this module, and that kind of thing. But recipes are great. People should use them right away. They're lovely.
That's good to hear.
Are there any other hurdles that you ran into with the recipe aside from just kind of missing features? Because I've written a couple recipes at this point, and I definitely hit a couple of roadblocks. So I'm curious about anything that's still missing, that or any gotchas that you could share for people that are looking at writing a recipe for the first time.
Well, I'll try to. I actually said something the other day that I said, what if we do this? I can't remember exactly what the suggestion was, but I'll try to remember it. But the big thing was not being able to load contents, which was critical for me to do a demo. And then I had to figure out how to run a post. This was a little bit tricky, but we're getting into some pretty esoteric stuff here, Nick. Like, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to do what I had to do, but maybe they will. So if you need an example of how to run code after your recipe is complete, well, maybe that's not so esoteric.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's one of that's probably the number one request in
Okay.
the
Well, this is how you
recipes
do it.
panel.
You go to the recipe, which is a different project in Drupal, and it's linked off of the automated testing kit project. So it's two separate projects. There's the project page for recipes, and then there's the project for the automated testing kit recipe, and then there's the project page for ATK itself. Now, if you go in there, you're going to find an example of an event that gets triggered because recipes is nice enough to trigger an event. Might be called post install or something like that. And so if you subscribe to that event, that's your opportunity to run cleanup code or whatever. So we do quite a bit of that in there. I can't remember all the things we do, but I just remember the page of code right now. We don't just run cron, we do a whole bunch of other things to set things up. So that's how you do that. If you want an example of how to run code after your recipe is installed, but still part of the recipe process, go look at our recipe and we'll show you.
Do you have that event subscribed actually in the automated testing kit? Because there's no event subscribers in the recipe.
Or which one are you looking at? There was an old
The-
repo.
Oh, are there two? Is it not the automated testing kit demo recipe?
Well, it should be. Are you on D.O?
Yeah, I'm looking at the 2.0 next version. There, we don't have
Okay.
to debug this live, but
Yeah, we don't have to debug it live, but the way you do that is, well, I guess there are actually two ways. You can do that. You can do the trigger. You can subscribe to the event. I'm not sure why you're not seeing it. I'd have to go look at it. The other possibility is, I suppose you could.
I found it.
You found it?
You have a submodule in the automated testing kit called automated testing kit demo.
Yes.
And that has the event subscriber. So the recipe itself, because recipes can't have code. So the recipe itself is a recipe, and then you have an event subscriber and a submodule that is required by the recipe that subscribes to that event. That makes perfect sense.
Yes, because they can't have code. And I think the request was, hey, can we have recipes have code? And it was declined. So you have to do it the way I did it there.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And the event is actually on recipe applied. So I assume that once the recipe application process finishes, that's when this runs. Oh yeah, nice. That's pretty clever. Yeah, that all lines up.
So if
So-
you want to do a demo of anything, recipes are the way to do it.
I think that's one. Honestly, I'm finding the two biggest use cases for me for recipes are that, like, demos, repeatable demos that you're just going to throw away after. So you don't have to worry about, like, recipes aren't meant to be applied over and reused like that. So like but I find that if you're applying it to a site that you're really going to use after, sometimes you end up in weird states. But if it's purely a demo, like the commerce demo or this demo, perfect use case.
Yeah. Great.
The other place that I've used
John
it really the other place I've used it really successfully is I have a client that needs to keep their CSV headers in sync across 11 sites, and we essentially use the recipe as a way to just migrate the content, but the configuration between them. We collaborate each time because we just want them to be in sync. And because it's very, very narrow and it's specific to this client, like we have total control on both sides of the recipe generation and all the endpoint sites, it works really well. I don't think recipes are yet at the point where you can do what the end goal is, which is like, hey, you know what? I want a blog. Let me take that blog recipe. Or I want this feature. Let me take that other recipe and apply it. We were actually talking
Sure,
about
you can. But
I'm saying that. Why do you say that, Nick? John, you have a rebuttal ready, I think.
Well, I mean, like, so if you have a site and it doesn't have a feature set, right? Doesn't have a blog, doesn't have SEO properly configured, doesn't have, I don't know, AI ready to go, right? Like you have the ability to install a recipe and add that functionality in there, right? So like, yes, it gets thorny if you already have a subset of what that recipe provides installed, because you're absolutely right. Things are going to get clobbered, overwritten, maybe a little bit fractured, right? But like ultimately, if you're like, hey, I don't have this functionality, like let me install this recipe, it's going to go through and do its thing and install that recipe code and provide you with that feature set, right? So I mean, I don't know that, like, you know, I would say that I mean, I think they're great for demos. I think it's great in the use case that you said with the CSPs, Nick. Like that makes a lot of sense, and those are great use cases for it. But I wouldn't necessarily say like it's not ready to be
I mean,
used in its true form.
have you used it that way yet? I mean, do you have sites
Yeah,
in production
I
that
use
you've
it.
applied recipes to
I
that?
use it for my personal site from time to time to apply certain features that I don't currently have on there.
Yeah,
Like
and
one I'm moving towards right now is like the SEO recipe. Like the way the SEO recipe implements SEO is far better than the way I do it on my personal site. So
Mm.
there are a bunch of core recipes that you can use as well that are shipped now. And so you can say, like, we use one of them, which is the media recipe. So we call the media recipe so that the media is all set up so that the
Mm.
ATK demo can keep on going. Now we didn't have to do all that. We just called that stock recipe. And so there's a page now with a listing of all the recipes that are available, and there are quite a few that'll set you right up. And I think, isn't Drupal CMS mostly comprised of recipes now,
it is, yeah.
basically?
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
but we were talking about this before the show started, so our patrons will be able to listen in. But Martin, who's been working on converting a lot of the event platform stuff to recipes, found a pretty crucial bug with trying to reuse pieces of Drupal CMS as a recipe. Like it
mm,
just it just fails, and that may not be recipes' fault. It may be more due to the way CMS is split. You know, does like subtree splitting and all sorts of like magic behind the scenes to make it so that the developers of CMS can develop in one place, but everything is a separate project on Drupal.org. So it may not be a recipe thing, it may be a infrastructure thing, but you can't really reuse Drupal CMS recipes at the moment outside of Drupal CMS.
Huh. Okay. So
mm,
let's move back
Get back.
into automated testing kit and specifically the automated testing kit demo recipe. I want to make sure I understand the use case for this and a specific use case that I'm kind of thinking of to see if it tracks with Andre what you're thinking, right? So I'm not going to install it on an existing site, but I have an existing site that I want to start building tests for because I'm haven't, right? So I could spin up the automated testing kit demo recipe in like a fresh Drupal install, right?
mhm.
And see how you guys do it, run the tests that come with it, and then update those tests for my site, right? In the demo environment to say, okay, like test for this specific module, this specific functionality. Say, yep, these tests look good here, and then I can use composer commands to install the appropriate modules and libraries on my personal site and move the updated tests over to my personal site, run them, and in theory, things should work, pretty much the same way. Is that
Close.
okay? Close. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Let me rearrange the order of operations there a little bit. So once you've installed the demo, you're going to play with it. You're going to understand how it all works, but you wouldn't customize your tests on the demo instant. So once you get comfortable, you say, "Oh, I see what they did. They've installed 6 different modules, everything from QA accounts to XML sitemap and whatever." And then here are the tests that run, and you look at all the tests, and the tests are all documented on the website. So you can, and they all have a unique ID on them and a description, and shows what category they go into. Are they caching tests? Are they login tests? Whatever. And then there are a bunch of tags, so everything gets tagged. If it alters the database, then it's going to have an alters DB tag. If it's email, it's going to have an email tag. If it's a node manipulation test, then it's going to have a node tag and so on. And then you identify, oh, I want maybe only 3/4 of these tests. Then you go over to your site, your actual website, you install with Composer Automated Testing Kit, you run the install program. And because it doesn't yet know how to prompt, do you want to do this, this, or this? Because it doesn't know how to do that yet. It'll install everything. And then you just go back and you delete from Composer whatever you don't want, and you delete the tests from your file folder that you don't want. Then you enable the module, you install your test framework, whether it's Cypress or Playwright. And you can, if it's Playwright, it's npx Playwright test, and it will run them all. And some of them will break because now your customized site is no longer vanilla Drupal.
Right.
It's going to have slight variations. And that's when you open up the whatever your favorite editor is. They integrate, obviously, for obvious reasons, really well into Visual Studio Code. The debugger is fantastic inside of Studio Code. So you install the Playwright extension, and that gives you really good testability. It gives you a new pane just for testing and a new Explorer. And then you can run inside of Visual Studio Code on that pane. You can run individual tests from within Visual Studio Code without dropping to the command line, or you can debug them there as well. It's really slick. The test loop is super fast now. I mean, remember the days when we had Cucumber and Selenium, and oof, it was a mess. This is now super fast. It's as fast writing tests as it is to write code.
So let me ask a follow-up question there, or a could I do this if I wanted to? So say I wanted to change the configuration of the demo, right, to kind of match a configuration I had on my site, just because I wanted to kind of like build a test. I wanted to test a test, basically build a test in the demo as opposed to like moving it to my site. That's something that I should be able to do, right? So like once I, it's just Drupal. So if I change some configuration, then I want to test that, I should be able to do it within the demo pretty easily.
Yep. And then make the final tweaks once you move it across. Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Totally doable. Yeah, the idea is to just make it super simple to get up and running fast, and we're in a whole new world. Like how many testing projects have failed in the history of the planet? A lot. And a lot of it is because the tools were ancient and clunky and flaky. Well, when Cypress came on the scene, I got to give them credit. They really moved things forward and showed people what testing could be. Sorry, I was interrupting you, Nora.
Oh, no, not at all. Thinking of future though, what would you say is on your roadmap specifically for the automated testing kit demo recipe?
Well, we could stay busy just by writing tests for different modules. Like that alone could keep you busy for years. So
Yeah,
right.
Please contribute your tests back because we can't do it all ourselves. And then FedRAMP is going to be a set of tests. So you might see kind of mini suites within the library that concentrate on certain things, because FedRAMP isn't just one test. It's actually, my initial analysis is probably going to have something like 12 tests to test all the things that FedRAMP wants, or that you can test from an end-to-end tool. So there's that too. And then we're going to just keep on looking for opportunities to, above the writing new tests, to make the actual communication to leverage the fact that we can communicate with Drupal and add more features like that, and more features that make testing easier, like the hooks. How many testing, see, if you're going to write there's white box testing, and then there's black box testing, and we're sort of extreme white box testing, which means you have total access to the source code. And that is not, it's common, but it also is not so easy always to get your changes into the queue so that the developers make the change so that you can target that element a little easier. For
Yeah.
instance, if you're a tester and you say, listen, I'm really having trouble targeting this element, it would be so much easier if you could just make this little change and add this class or this ID or something like that, or do something for me. And then, yeah, sometimes you get it in, but sometimes the dev team isn't totally on board with that, and those requests fall to the bottom. So what are the things that we can do to make the tester's life easier, like those hooks, so that they don't have to bug the developers? And it's out of the box already, the easiest that you can do. And we can do that because we have full control over Drupal.
So I guess I have a feature request then, because as somebody who's been doing a lot of core testing and core work, there's like different types of tests we all know, or maybe we don't all know, but there's different types of tests. And I find, for example, kernel tests are usually pretty easy to debug, right? If a kernel test fails, it's usually like, hey, I failed on this line and this is my error, right? And sometimes you have to dig and find it, but generally, like, you have a starting point. You go to that line. When Nightwatch tests fail or functional JS tests fail, it's like button ID could not be found. And you're like, okay, which button? Which ID? What page? And then what you end up having to do for those types of tests is like, okay, or those types of errors is you have to go, okay, let me look at the test that failed. Okay, let me start at the top. Okay, the first thing it did is create a user and create this content. Let me do that. Okay, then it went to this page and added this field. Let me do that. Then it went to this page, and then, oh, I just hit the error. That's what the problem is. And there's like output, so sometimes you can see it directly. But does the kit make that process a little bit easier, or are there plans to make that process a little bit easier?
I haven't actually thought about that yet, but I think that's a great example of one thing that we might be able to do to make this easier. I don't know quite how to do it yet, but since we can communicate with the destination, with the target server, there might be something that we can do with that. Both Cypress and Playwright do have video recording tools built in, so that if
Oh,
the test is running on this already is going to make a huge difference for people. So if the test is running on your CI/CD system, you can turn it on such that it will only record the videos on failed tests. You might have to run it again, for instance. So it fails and you've got retry turned on, and then on the second time it'll make the recording. So now you have a recording that's already going to help you a ton, Nick, because that recording is
yeah.
going to bring you right to where you want. But there might be a way to improve that even a little bit more, come to think of it.
Okay.
Have to think
Yeah,
about
I
that.
mean, I'm think and specifically in Drupal, like, there's a lot of helpers, which are great when you're writing the tests, but not so great when you're trying to debug, because, like, there's a helper that creates, like, these fake fields and displays and things, and it's like, well, when you're testing that, it's great, but when you have to recreate it, it's like, well, now you have to find. There's a lot of digging that could happen there, but that would be amazing, because whenever you get failures like that, I can't tell you the number of button or ID not found failures I saw. Tracking that down can take a fair bit of time.
Well,
Mm,
I'm not quite
okay.
sure how to do it, but if you have an idea, ping me. I'm available on Slack, and we
I
can talk
mean,
about it.
honestly, the way that might be able, one really quick, and then we'll move on. But if there was just a way to be like almost at a breakpoint in the test that says run the test until this point and then stop and give me access to the site under test so that I can do the
Well, you
next
can
step.
do that definitely locally. So you can put a breakpoint
Right.
on Visual Studio Code. So that's doable already. Or you can add a .debug statement inside of Cypress, basically sort of the same thing. But the key is what happens when you have a test that fails in your CI/CD system, which is remote. That's a little
Yeah.
bit. That's the trick. How do you find that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for joining us, Andre. It's been a huge pleasure chatting about the automated testing kit and the recipe. I'll definitely be checking out. If you could send us a link to the Drupal Forge one, we can put that in the show notes too. But I'll definitely be checking that out. Like I said, I have a client that's been talking about testing in the past week, or adding additional testing in the past week or two. So I'll definitely be evaluating this and looking forward to seeing what comes in the future.
Okay, great. And then so here's how people can get support. So there's a automated testing kit channel on the Drupal workspace. So go ahead and join that and ask a question there. And I'm monitoring that. And one of the other maintainers is monitoring that. So we can help you with that. Like I said, there are lots of videos on the learning resources and videos on the project page itself. We've implemented it now for Stanford and for UCOP. So you can get a sense of how other people are doing it. But basically the bottom line is we did exactly what I was saying. We started with vanilla tests and then we customized them until they were working. And then we made the changes on GitHub in the case of UC. And now every PR that they put in has tests running. And then of course,
Awesome.
one more thing, you might want to capture the test results. So we are out of the box integrated with Testany, which is a really cool, relatively new test case management system. Not Testery, which is also a cool service, but this is Testany. And they're less expensive. They give you 3 free accounts, which is just enough for you to get going, really, because you need 3 accounts to get going for testing. And then, so what we do is, so with an engagement, we'll put all the tests inside of the test case management tool. And then they have another little CLI tool where we can send the results back to the test case management tool. And now you can track your results over time. And you can see, am I getting better test coverage? Am I getting my pass fail rate? Is it improving over time?
Very cool. I mean, I have my homework cut out for me.
Well,
That's for sure. A lot of stuff to
ping me if you
research.
need some help. Happy to help.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing become a patron. All right, Andre, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can, probably the best way is Slack, because I'm on Slack all the time. And you'll find me under the Drupal workspace there. Or you can email me at aangel, AANGEL, at performantlabs.com. And I didn't know Talking Drupal had a newsletter, so I'm going to have to sign up for that too.
You do. And Nora, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Anyone can find me as Technora, that's TEKNORAH, on Drupal Slack, LinkedIn, pretty much anywhere, Technora.
How about you, John?
You can find me personally at Picozzi.com on the socials and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if
And I should mention, because you all mentioned the socials, I'm also on LinkedIn, but that's the only social I'm on.
Fabulous. And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
See you next week.